Well, thank you for watching again. We've been looking at this series on asking the question, what does the Bible say? Looking at a lot of these different topics. And I'd like to expand on a topic that, or a subject that we had started discussing in another session, and want to pick it up from here. It's one that I think is certainly very relevant. It deserves a lot of attention and deserves some the thoughts being given to it, and that is of church leadership. We mentioned church leadership, and as I mentioned, a different session that we've been looking at, and just how important it is to establish elders and what the elders are, and looking at the plurality of it. But in this session, we're going to be kind of carrying that forward and looking at what the qualifications are for the elders. And so I think it is very important for us to realize that it's a great thing to want to establish elders in the local congregation, but it is equally important to make sure that we make the right decisions, and that the right men are certainly installed and put into these positions that are going to be it's going to affect a lot of different things with the congregation, and we want to make sure that the congregation is operating in a way that glorifies God first, and keeps it organized, and keeps everything going with it. And so, as we get into this, the qualifications we find in a few different scriptures and a few different things. Paul had a lot to say about it to Titus. He had a lot to say about it to Timothy. And if you read each of those accounts, both in Titus chapter 1, 1 Timothy chapter 3, they are, the lists are identical. I mean, when you're looking at these, and of course they would be, but it's, once you establish, or as you begin to establish setting up elders in the congregation, it is so important to follow the guidelines for these positions. God had something in mind when He wanted men to serve in these earthly capacities, and to oversee the different, his different congregations, the local body, as it were. And so as we look at each of these, we're able to see what these qualifications or what these characteristics are. And first off, it's interesting as we get into all of these as well, that most of them, just about all of them, in fact, are qualities that are expected of every Christian. And there's these men that we want to put into the position as being overseers, or the pastors, bishops, whatever the term would be used as far as how they serve with them. It's that there are certain characteristics or traits that we're expected to follow, or that they're expected to follow and live up to. But that is something ultimately that each of us have, the expectation is for us as well. And you can find most of these in other parts of Scripture that are a description of the Christian lifestyle. But there are a few of them that do set apart the elders, and there's a reason why these are put in place like they are, and certainly we want to be able to follow them the way that it says. One of these you find in Titus chapter 1, I think, gives such a great overview of what these are. And in fact, in Titus chapter 1, beginning in verse 5, it says this, for this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking, appoint elders in every city as I commanded you. And here it goes into this list of different qualifications. If a man is blameless, and that doesn't mean sinless, but blameless in that, he doesn't have any reproach against him, that no one can accuse him of anything. If a man is blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination, for a bishop must be blameless. And there's the interchanging words again. For a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine. In other words, he's not a drinker, not violent, not greedy for money, but hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convict those who contradict. And so we have these, these guidelines of these, these different traits, these different characteristics that are expected of every elder. I want to, as we really start this, there's a couple of ideas I think people sometimes have with these qualifications. And of course, they're so important because every single one of these has to do with how mature a Christian is, in order to serve. And, we see in Titus chapter 1, we also see it in 1 Timothy chapter 3 that, they are not to be a novice. And one of the descriptions of an elder is this idea of the presbyteros, or the, which is another name for elder or presbyter, and that is not lacking in age, or not, that he's an older individual, and by older, there's wisdom that comes with experience, and certainly, and that's, I think is such a great importance to the church and the local congregation, especially with making decisions, that you don't want someone inexperienced or has, no Bible knowledge, and you could, without even realizing it or intending it, could compromise truth or compromise certain things with, how they're set up. But as with looking at all of these different characteristics, though, is one of the things that sometimes people will bring up in the religious world, and looking at this, or especially in the Lord's church, was we understanding that, okay, now we have elders, how do we install them, or what do they need to do, or what's expected of them, is whether or not these are explicit guidelines that are set, or if they're just kind of general characteristics, and that they're just ideas, or whatever the case is. And I'm not sure if you've heard of that or not, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if we just back up and we ask, well, if God intended these to be general characteristics and not requirements, then how would he have worded these commands in 1 Timothy and Titus? So then on the flip side, you say, well, if the Lord really did intend for these qualities to be requirements, how would he have worded that? And if you were to say, okay, somebody who is going to fill this office, if somebody's going to take on this responsibility, how would I word it in such a way so somebody would know these characteristics are required? I don't know of a much plainer way than saying that an overseer must be, and then listing the requirements.
That's a good point.
And that is exactly how 1 Timothy 3 verse 2 begins. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, etc., etc. And even back in Titus, while it doesn't open with that, what is rather interesting is it begins, verse 6, if anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, his children are believers, not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. Then verse 7, for an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. And there we have that must be again. And what's interesting is, after he says must be, he begins with above reproach, which is how he began verse 6. So, and it's not as if those first statements weren't requirements and the others are. By bookending those first series of instructions or characteristics, he's essentially saying, this is what I mean by above reproach. So all of these in Titus are just like in 1 Timothy. These are all things that God is saying you must be. If God was trying to communicate the fact that these are requirements, there's virtually no way he could have made it any plainer than wording it this way. Now, if the flip side is true, what he wanted for us to know is these are general characteristics, well, there's a host of other ways you could have worded it. And in fact, if you wanted to emphasize that these are not requirements, these are general characteristics, this is actually kind of a misleading way to say that, because it sure sounds like they're requirements.
Right. It's interesting when you get into whether or not these are, and that's a great point, that it says you must do this, and it doesn't leave any flexibility or anything. And I think sometimes people get in the habit of as they are maybe thinking of installing new men, and or if they, a great need to install the men, that, we want to make sure that we don't get so desperate for having elders in there that we are willing to compromise, any one of these. And I think sometimes we, some of the dangers that come with that is that, if you say, well, one thing is more important than another, or maybe these are just general, or maybe they fit most of these or whatever, all of a sudden it becomes a subjective list. And it's, okay, well, we'll just pick the characteristics that mostly fit, this certain individual that we had in mind, or, and when it becomes subjective like that, it's really easy to start compartmentalizing and just say, okay, well, we'll just put this over here. Maybe they're not strong in that area, or they don't meet this one, but look at all of this over here, and let's look at everything that they do meet over here. And when you do that, you really are compromising, I think, with what the Lord has purposed for His church. There is no flexibility in what the Lord is expecting of the leaders. I mean, these are the men who are going to be making the important decisions for the good of the church, or, and the church in this context is the local congregation. Yeah. And so there's, there are certain expectations that God put these things here for a reason. And He said, you must do these things for a reason. Now, having said that, you think on the flip side of that, how, it's important, I guess, for people to realize that that while elders are expected to fit all of these things, and that there is a description, it's almost, he has to arm himself with all of these different things, that we don't hold them to such a high standard that it's just it's unattainable for them.
Sure.
I've seen good men not step in because other men have decided you're not good enough. You don't fit this. You don't fit this, and and it's just, and they really don't give them for one thing, they don't give them the encouragement that they need. But second of all, they, their bar is set so high sometimes that they just think, well, you're just never going to reach this, and is that fair?
Yeah, and we do, I think, have to maybe show a little bit of grace here, not in the sense that we ignore the statements made by the hand of Paul here, but that we need to realize that everybody grows. And if people grow, that means they weren't always perfect. And that means that anybody who fills the role of an elder is going to have something in their past that doesn't match this list. The key, though, being that it's in their past.
Right.
It's not something that continues to define them. Now, some of these things will actually, some of these qualifications will require them to have done certain things in the past. But there are some of these that, well, of course, a person has not met all these qualifications for their entire life. The question is, are they at a point now where they can be described this way? And I think it's important, you noted earlier on, that being above reproach doesn't mean they're perfect.
Right.
And that is such an important thing for us to keep in mind. It just, there's nothing that's so obvious in their life that anybody can say, really, that guy? I mean, look at what he's doing with his life. There shouldn't be something that's glaringly obvious about them that would cause people to dismiss them.
Right. They are, this is it's an important office for sure, but it's one that we really should build up, and just such an encouraging thing, because it is a great office. When you look at when you look at 1 Timothy 3 and verse 7, or 1 Timothy 5, in verse 17, and it talks about the rewards that come with the eldership, that they are deserving of double honor, and there's a reason for that. That's this is a tremendous office, and we should encourage, I think, young people to want to start striving. I know they're a long way off from it, but how great it is for the church when they can find men who love the church so much and love the brethren so much, and and they're already men that are already, a lot of the elders that will step into that position are doing the work already, and and it's just the next natural step of what what they would do, it to be able to start making decisions and being in on those meetings and making important decision for the body and so forth. And we need to really encourage those men and build them up rather than tear them down. As far as now, if someone is explicitly defying any one of these, and that's one thing. But other than that, if they're not violating these, just, give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, an eldership is, I've served under, a couple of different elderships, and I know you have as well. And, there's a learning curve that comes with being an elder. They're not going to slide right in and know everything, or they're not going to slide right in and just, and have everything stress free. And, elders that have been serving for years know that's not the case.
Yep.
And there's a reason why, we talked in another session about, it being a plurality of elders. And I think that's such an important thing for a new elder to come in realizing that he's not the only one that's going to make that. And I think sometimes they, when elders start, when people start putting elders' names up for serving, some of them can, they might get self-conscious, they might get nervous, they might get stressed and think, could I do this? Or, am I good enough? Do I know enough? Whatever. And that's just part of the territory. I think every person naturally has that kind of, whether it's an elder, preachers go through the same thing. Am I going to be effective in this congregation? And they need to realize that they're not the only ones. There's other elders there for a reason, so that they can lean on them. Some of them are going to have to get, they get mentored into that position. Those elders that have served longer are able to take them under their wing and kind of show them the ropes, and and they realize that it's an eldership. There's a reason for that they're, this plurality, that they can, and they need to be compatible. And so there's no, we've seen some dysfunctional elderships and how damaging that is to the congregation when the elders can't even get along. And so it's important to, to get men in there who do, who can lean on each other, who build each other up, who are there for each other. And it's a, because it is an office that really is so important and vital, needed, by the congregations. So.
Yeah, and when it comes then to those qualifications, as we've seen, these are qualifications. Right. These are not suggestions.
Right.
And that shouldn't surprise us, as you already mentioned. These, for the most part, are characteristics that should describe all Christians, not just elders. These are things that all of us should be striving for. However, there are some things that are more specific, and it is a few of those then that tends to be the primary the primary source of the discussions and the disagreements about the nature of the eldership. First of those being the statement that he must be the husband of one wife. Right. That has been the source of a lot of controversy and arguments in times past. I think what is important to note is, first of all, just within the context, why these things, and well, we can go ahead and mention both of them, the husband of one wife and having, as Titus says, believing children, or as Timothy states, he must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children in submission. I think what's important to note is that even in the context, why he mentions both of those. Beginning with the children there. Paul tells us that he must keep his children submissive, verse 5, for if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? There's a reason given. It's that if he's not an effective parent, if he doesn't know how to direct children, how is he going to direct the church?
That's a great point. That's a key thing with what we're looking at right here, as far as the wife and the child part. Everything else is just characteristics. But he says specifically with having the wife and the child or children, however, we'll look at that I want to look at that in just a moment. But if he does not know how to rule his own house, and there are things that a man who is called to be the spiritual leader in a home will have to deal with in his own house. There's discipline, there's encouragement, there's a really a balance there that, to have a really good functioning home that's faithful and edifying and that glorifies God. And, and this says, if you can't, if you don't know how to rule your own house, how are you going to take care of the church, the household of God? And so there is a direct correlation right there for a reason that is in Scripture. And so, if a person's never married, never has children, how is he going to do this? And how is he going to be able to, and that's, it's so interesting because we look at it as our congregations as a church family, and that's how it's always been looked at. And so, we are dealing in a familial atmosphere that, and so if he's never had the experience of leadership in his own home, and then you're going to be put in a position where you're going to have a much bigger family, having never served in that capacity, it's, think of how difficult that could be and how counterproductive some of the decisions might be if you're not careful with it. And so, this is definitely one that, there's, with looking at this is why, this is why the wife and the children are so important to this, so that you can take that knowledge and apply it to there. Now, having said that, I want to, let's go back to, looking at the husband of one wife, since you brought it up. With the one wife, we know that things happen. We know that, with the husband of one wife means that he does obviously have to be married. And what about a wife that has passed away? Is he qualified then to be? Now we can look at this in a couple of different ways. That, maybe he was serving and his wife had passed away, or his wife had passed away before, and is he qualified to, to kind of move into it? And so. And I think, that's where we can kind of get our answer, I guess, with it. But what about the husband of one wife? I mean, how does...
I think that, again, if we just limit ourselves to the context, I think it helps us to gain a little bit of an insight into what Paul's point might be. Because there are a number of different views on the husband of one wife. Is this simply speaking against polygamy, which we know was a thing in that day and age, although by this point in history it isn't as much of a thing as it had been in times previous, although it still existed. So is he just primarily dealing with that, or is the term more generally speaking about he's a generally faithful person? He was a one woman kind of guy,
right? Which I've heard described, and
and I think that right off the bat, we can just go over just a little bit further in the book of 1 Timothy to the 5th chapter, where we have some qualifications for widows who may be supported by the church. And one of the requirements for a widow to be supported by the church is, in verse 9, we're told, let a widow be enrolled if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband. This is exactly the same construction as the husband of one wife, just in the reverse. It's a one man kind of woman.
Right.
So if this is talking about general faithfulness, then Paul is saying she needed to have been a faithful person. Well, is she not still a faithful person? Well, that's clearly not what Paul has in mind. That, well, she was faithful. Well, we're not really concerned with if she was faithful.
Right.
We want to know something about her current state. She was the wife of one husband.
I like that as well. This, it's the same thing. Something makes her a widow, and it's that she doesn't have a husband anymore. Just as that elder serving in that capacity is, something makes him a widower, and that is that his wife has passed away. One of the ways I think we can look at that is first, if his wife has passed away, and he's and he needs to be the husband of one wife. That wife on the other side, is she married to him? Well, no. We know that after death, there's no marriage or anything, and there's different tasks for us to do and so forth. But if she's not married to him, then how can he be married to her? And the other thing is that I've heard like you said, there's people. You've heard this said before that, well, he's still faithful, and so why can't he just keep on doing what he's doing? And to that, I would probably bring in asking the question. Well, you get back to that husband of one wife, and I get that he's still faithful, and I get that nothing's going to keep him from being faithful. But there's a ways that are these things are there for a reason. God hasn't given any gray areas. He just says the husband of one wife, and we can try to reason as much as we want to from our standpoint of, well, he's still going to do a great job, or we go, but it's the husband of one wife. And you think of when that wife passes away, a lot. I've heard people say that, well, he technically is still the husband of one wife. Well, no, he's now able. The moment that she passed away, he's now able to get remarried again. And being able to get remarried again makes him not a husband of one wife. Yep. Otherwise we'd have polygamy.
Yep.
And so he's capable of he's able and has every scriptural every scriptural author's authority to get remarried again with the husband of one wife. One of the ways that I think helped us with the decision in the past of whether or not someone was qualified is at a congregation was asking the question, if he had not been serving as an elder to begin with, and he was, a widower, his wife had passed away, would you be able to still install him nonetheless as an elder at that point? And that, and all of a sudden everything changed, and they said, well, no, of course not. And well, if you can't do it at that point, then what makes you think then that he's still qualified even when nothing's changed?
Yeah.
You're just trying to, you're trying to just accept something, or I guess trying to work something into where, it's okay here, but it's not okay here. And, he was doing a great job, and, maybe he was. I mean, that's great when elders can have that kind of relationship with the brethren. But what does the Bible say about it? And what, if we're going to hold to the Bible and say, God didn't say, well, it has to be the husband of one wife, unless this, or except for this. He just says he has to be the husband of one wife.
And I think too, if we just think about this from the standpoint of common sense, is if a man has been married to a woman, and if he's qualified to be an elder, the indication is that, well, he's obviously not a young man,
right?
And he's probably been married for some time. Is he going to be the same man after his wife passes away? And I think that anybody who's been married for any period of time would say absolutely not.
Right.
I haven't even been married now for 5 months, and I can tell you that I'm not the same guy I was when I was single. Marriage changes people, which is why God instituted marriage to begin with. It was not good that man was alone. If he's no longer married to her, he's not the same person. What I think is important is back in Titus chapter 1, as we mentioned, Paul begins saying, verse 6, if anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife and his children are believers, not open to the charge of debauchery or subordination. Verse 7, for an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. That idea of being the husband of one wife and having children who are believers is bookended with that statement that an elder must be above reproach. And what that seems to indicate is that being the husband of one wife and having children that are believers is how you avoid being above or how you are above reproach. Or at least it's one of the areas, one of the key areas. And I think that, again, if we think about this in any other setting, that makes sense. Why would these things make him above reproach? Well, let's think about if he didn't have them. Here is a guy then who is going to shepherd the congregation who has never raised children. You say, well, how is this man qualified? He doesn't know how to deal with other people. He doesn't know how to deal with people who are immature, doesn't know how to go through this. He doesn't have the experience that somebody who's raised a family has. He certainly won't know how to guide young families who are struggling themselves with raising kids. There's all kinds of things that he just doesn't have any practical experience in.
Right. There's a reason why when when children are almost compared to, if the elder is compared to a parent, then the children could be compared to the congregation. And parents have the responsibility to know and to monitor even what their children are doing at all times. And of course, the elder is a shepherd and needs to know his flock. He needs to know what is going on. Are there people that are struggling? Are there people that are just sinning? Are there people that are, that aren't there all the time that should be? Are there, I mean, you need to know the ins and outs. And, and obviously the larger the congregation, it's a little tougher to do that. But at the same time, elders, will at least try to do that. Parent at home make sure that their children are provided for. And how does an elder know like how to provide for anyone if he has never provided for someone except for himself? Because there's a great responsibility with that, knowing what their children should and should not be doing. And then if they're not doing something correctly, or if they're doing something that obviously is contrary to the will of God or contrary to Scripture, if they're involved in something or watching something or whatever the case might be, how do you deal with the child? And how do you deal, and so there is that correlation right there.
But I think you also see then that same idea with being the husband of one wife.
Right.
How does that make you above reproach? Well, there's a whole series of reasons why being married would keep you being above reproach. And you think about, for one thing, if a man does not have a wife, then the women of the congregation could say, you don't know what our needs are and what we're going through. And you can't understand because you're not a woman. Well, if he's married, he's still not a woman, but he has a woman that he can talk to.
Right. You look at that in that way. It's a husband, being the head of the household. Christ said that the husband's the head of the house just as I am the head of the church. And, he's expected to take care of his family. And that's exactly what an elder is called to do, is to take care of his family, the congregation. And part of that, it's knowing the spiritual decisions to make, the physical decisions to make. I have a task to take care of my wife now. You have a task to take care of your wife, and all different areas. And we provide for them, make sure that they don't go without. And so that's the same thing. He needs to make sure that that congregation's taking care of the way that he would provide for his wife, or make decisions to and you approach it. You're not a dictator at home, you're not a dictator in the congregation, but you certainly have that you have that obligation to to treat that congregation as well as you possibly can, to make sure that that they're all together with it. Let's take a look at children, since we're on with families and looking at that, because this has come up in a lot of discussions, and that is, can an elder have one child? Is it many children? We see the plurality of children in this instance, and so can he serve as an elder having only one child?
And so many times when it comes to religious things, we get so caught up in maybe the wording of something that we throw our common sense out the window. That if we were dealing with this question in really any other sphere, it wouldn't be a question. You might, if you think about a ship's going down, and the announcement comes that will any families with children make their way to the life rafts? Is a family with one kid going to go? Yes, that wording includes someone who has one kid.
Right.
You use it in the plural because that's the broader sense that you would make that statement in. It doesn't exclude families with one kid. It's just the way you word it in the broader sense to include any of them.
Right. That's a it's a good point, and it's such an important point to look at when we're looking at these. And again, we can appeal to 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5, being the key. If a man does not know how to rule his own house, he can know how to rule his own house with one child. He can still discipline that child like you would one child, two children, 3 children, 4 children. Make sure that that they are all taken care of. That he's trying to make sure that all of them stay faithful the way they should. And it's and like you said, and I love that wording. And then I've used it in another way to say, we host a camp here, and if we stood up and said, okay, those of you with children, we want to welcome, we'd love for you to come to camp. I guess the single child is excluded if that's the case. It's a generic term. Of course they're not. And so it is a general statement right here that, if they have children, and it just, and it's just a matter of knowing how to take care of their household, with, and don't you think God would also say that, okay, if it's only children, he was very particular in the husband of one wife. Would he not be particular in saying, okay, the husband that has children, multiple children, but it's a general statement instead. It's not one that says, okay, you have to have more than one child in order to do this. That's not what it says. And it's just, and to force that in there is, putting something there that's not there. It is, that's, it's worded that, if you're having faithful children, being this, he just wants to know that he can rule his own household, in this way. And so it's it's interesting when we get into some of this verbiage and the terminology, I guess, that some people use, that we can't, we need to be very careful, because if we're not, we're going to be very dogmatic about things that we really have no authority for it. But it is a very important, it is an important office, and certainly one that we need to, give all the attention to. And so things like that do come up with, the wife and the children. And you look at some of the other qualifications as well that we looked at. You said earlier that, these are things that, all Christians it's expected with all Christians, with the exception of, these few. And, and you look at that, and it really is. I mean, that's something, way, and that's, I guess, part of why you're not to be a novice. I mean, someone who's a brand new Christian may not excel in all these different areas. Not, that someone, we have our strengths, we have our weaknesses, we have things that we need to work on, but a novice or someone who inexperienced is really going to have a lot of growing to do.
Yeah.
And that's not to say they wouldn't make an exceptional elder one day. But we grow, and we mature in the way that we do, and certainly need to build them up.
Absolutely.
All right. So with that, do you have anything?
I think that's good.
All right. Well, hopefully that explains a little bit about it. There are some some of these things that we don't want to get too in depth. They're pretty self-explanatory with a lot of these qualifications. Most of these qualifications are very self-explanatory. And you want to make sure that you get the right man in there for the job. And certainly it is a great thing. We want to, the very first thing it says, and this is not a qualification, by the way, but it says that, the one who wants to, serve as an elder desires a good work, and they certainly desire great work. That's not a qualification per se. In fact, I think if you fit all of these different qualifications that, follow that, I think it is important to think about that office and to think how you can serve in that capacity, because we need good leaders in our congregations. We need men who can step in that fit all of these qualifications. And if you fit all of these things and you just flat, if you don't want to serve, it's just me, but I think you do a great disservice to the local church when you can do that. Because when someone puts your name on that form, they're looking at you and saying, that person has the ability to do this. And you are their choice in, in who they think could lead them. And they're saying that, they would be honored to serve under you, and that they would, be happy to, to look up to you, and just, what a great position that is. And that's why it's so important, when hopefully you don't just overlook the, when the form is handed in, or when someone wants to bring you up, or if they talk to you and ask you questions and want to make sure that you're the right fit. And, they obviously think you're the right fit because they want to put your name up. And how, and it's, hopefully it's an encouragement. I know it's flattering, I'm sure, for the, those who are in there, but you want to make sure that above anything else, we glorify God with this position. And get these right men in there who are humble, who don't go in there with a big head, or thinking that they're going to have any more authority than what God has given them. But they are men that are certainly well deserving of that double honor. They're certain, they're deserving of the, of the praise that even God's given to them. And so hopefully, if someone wants to put your name up, please consider it, because they know that you can do the job. They're confident that you can do it. And we need to make sure that we encourage these men to step into this such an important position with it. But anyway, that's it. If you have any questions or comments, please, again, make sure you put them in the comments below, or you can email me. You can email Andy if we said something that might have triggered a thought or a question, and we look forward to seeing what you have. In any case, we will see you in the next session.